Glen Ridge Riders are a team. Right, Kyle?
Right.
See, Kyle understands. It's a simple choice. Do you want to share victory with your friends or enjoy defeat by yourself?
Back off, Glenn. No, it's okay, Will. It's fine. Go ahead. Try it.
That was young Leonardo DiCaprio in an episode of the new Lassie in 1989, his first professional acting gig. In a few short years, his stardom would skyrocket. In the 90s, he would become the face of a generation. By the 2000s, DiCaprio would be one of the most financially successful actors of all time. Today, his films have collectively earned a whopping $6 billion at the box office, an impressive feat for a leading man who hasn't appeared in any franchises. He is one of the most celebrated actors and recognizable faces in the history of cinema. But how did he get here? How did this young guy, or as Robert De Niro liked to call him, that little blonde one, simply become Leo? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about today. In this episode, I look at the career of Leonardo DiCaprio, particularly his iconic partnership with the legendary director Martin Scorsese, who was instrumental in shaping his career as a serious leading man. I'll be touching upon Leo's start as a child actor in the 1990s, his ascent into superstardom, his brushes with Scorsese over the decades, how his collaborations with the director changed both of their careers, and finally, how this guy played a huge role in their story. Leonardo DiCaprio was born in 1974 in Los Angeles. He grew up at the junction of Hollywood Boulevard and Western Avenue, an underprivileged area whose surrounding streets were populated with crackheads, junkies, and prostitutes. His mother was a legal secretary and his father was a comic book writer. His parents divorced before Leo turned 1 but agreed to co-parent their son. While he didn't grow up in a performing arts household, Leo was exposed to many artistic people from his father's intimate circle. As a child, he was already rubbing shoulders with rock stars like the Velvet Underground, cartoonist and musician Robert Crumb, and psychedelic drug advocate Timothy Leary. Leo even met future collaborator director Baz Luhrmann when he was 12 years old because of this circle. Luhrmann has described DiCaprio Sr. as a Z-League of counterculture. It was a very hippie and exciting childhood, and the young boy was encouraged to express himself in any way he could. He would make up original monologues, attend music and art festivals with his parents, and he would imitate all the interesting people that he met. When Leo reached elementary school, he was given a scholarship to attend the University Elementary School in Westwood. DiCaprio described the high-end campus as the Garden of Eden. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, especially after growing up in a rough neighborhood. By high school, he had to leave Westwood and he enrolled into a local public school. On his first day, he was beaten up by the other kids. He went home to his mother and told her that he wanted to get out of the public school system, and the way he was going to do it was by becoming a successful actor. She agreed to start taking him to auditions. DiCaprio began his acting career in commercials and small TV bit roles such as the aforementioned The New Lassie and episodes of Santa Barbara, Parenthood, and Growing Pains, which garnered him a small fan following. Auditioning in the early 90s was as competitive as ever. Casting calls were attended by many young actors who are now household names. Alongside Leo were actors like Tobey Maguire and Joaquin Phoenix. However, even without much experience, casting directors saw something special in the young actor. He quickly rose above the rest and soon garnered films in B pictures such as Critters 3 and Poison Ivy, two movies that Leo really wants everyone to forget about. In 1992, he finally got his big break. Scottish director Michael Caton Jones was preparing a film adaptation of Tobias Wolff's autobiographical novel This Boy's Life. The 1950s set story follows a teenager named Toby and his relationship with his abusive stepfather Dwight. The role of Toby was very sought after. Any young actor worth their salt was considered for the role. Leo was just one of over 300 boys auditioning for Caden Jones and possible co-star Robert De Niro, who had signed on to play the role of Dwight. Unlike his peers, Leo wanted to come to his audition prepared. He watched all of the iconic Robert De Niro films from the 1970s, which happened to be directed by a fellow named Martin Scorsese. This Boy's Life was a very coveted role, and a lot of my friends that I grew up with in the industry were all fighting for the role, Leo told Christina Radish in 2014. So I quickly gave myself a film education. I watched 3 or 4 films a day. All of the actors of my generation were influenced by the films of the 70s, during the directorial era of filmmaking, and the films that really stood out the most for all of us were Scorsese's films. I remember watching Taxi Driver specifically, and having the protagonist fool me in that way. I was so invested in his loneliness, and had such an empathy for that character, and then all of a sudden, he was doing an assassination attempt. But more so than that, the areas that Marty was able to explore in his filmmaking, he made you feel so incredibly uncomfortable. He had a way of immersing you in his filmmaking that just really stood out to me as a young actor. I remember saying to myself, someday I want to do something that good. I want to be able to be in one scene of his films. Leo's homework paid off. He auditioned for Toby 6 times, performing in the new Hollywood style that De Niro himself had practiced over 2 decades ago. He left a lasting impression. When Caden Jones asked De Niro whom between the final 4 boys would he like to act with, he simply said, "The little blonde one." The making of This Boy's Life was a major learning experience for DiCaprio, who hadn't had much experience on film yet. At the beginning of the shoot, he was a menace. He kept making jokes and harassed the crew members with his young friends. In his own words, Leo called himself a wild child who didn't know how to conduct himself on a film set. However, Michael Caden Jones and Robert De Niro decided to take the young man under their wings and teach him not only the fundamental basics of filmmaking, but also their cinematic process. Leo told Deadline in an interview in 2016 that what he learned on the set of This Boy's Life has stayed with him forever. Caden Jones taught him to be professional, to let the crew finish their jobs, and to try to understand everything going on around him, while De Niro shared his wisdom as an actor. Leo watched him in awe, seeing how the legend worked and prepared for his role. Later, De Niro would continue to support young Leo's career by recommending him to other filmmakers and even appearing alongside him in 1996's Marvin's Room. He was his first Hollywood mentor. Behind closed doors, De Niro was equally impressed with Leo as Leo was with him. As we all know, De Niro made his name in the 1970s by working with Martin Scorsese. I won't talk about their collaborations now because it deserves its own video, but by 1992, the pair were already considered film royalty. They had made 7 legendary movies together, including Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and Goodfellas. In addition, they had a strong real-life friendship as well. Scorsese has called De Niro his brother and credits him for helping him get over his drug addiction after the critical failure of New York, New York. After an overdose in the late 70s, De Niro brought the director the script for Raging Bull and encouraged his friend to get sober and to get back to work. Anyway, more on that next time, and back to This Boy's Life. During production, De Niro called Scorsese on the phone to tell him about his new miraculous acting discovery. Scorsese recalls, "Robert De Niro told me, 'By the way, I'm working with this young kid. He's really good. You should work with him sometime. His name is DiCaprio.' And I said, 'Okay.' We don't see each other that often, so for him to recommend somebody out of the blue that way to me during a phone call was very, very special." Scorsese kept this boy's name in his mind for the next few years. This Boy's Life was not a financial or critical hit. In fact, most of the reviews were very mixed, and many of them targeted De Niro's scenery-chewing performance. However, if there was one consistent thing about the reviews, it was the good notices for Leonardo DiCaprio. Todd McCarthy of Variety called Leo excellent, an 18-year-old thespian who delivers a gamut of emotions. Roger Ebert noted how he held his own against more experienced actors, and Rita Kempley of the Washington Post wrote that the young actor had poignancy. These strong reviews and good work on screen caught the attention of another filmmaker, Lasse Hallström, who was casting for his upcoming film, the small-town family drama What's Eating Gilbert Grape. The role of the intellectually disabled Arnie Grape was a tough role to cast for Hallström, who was seriously considering to hire an unknown. When he saw Leo's raw and truthful work in this boy's life, he began to reconsider. He called Michael Caden-Jones and asked him about DiCaprio. Caden-Jones then replied, "If you can get the kid, get the kid." After he nailed the audition, Hallström offered the part of Arnie to Leo, who had a big decision to make. On the table was an offer from Disney to star in their upcoming Salem witch comedy Hocus Pocus. Leo thought about it long and hard. Should he go for the large paycheck movie, or opt for more challenging work in smaller productions the way his cinematic idols De Niro and Scorsese did in the 1970s? He chose the latter. I'd done This Boy's Life and they'd given me the offer for Hocus Pocus, and I told them no. He later told writer Mike Fleming Jr., "I wanted this part in Gilbert Grape, and it was a gamble because I'd never had any real money in my life, and it was the first real money offer I'd ever gotten. But the gamble paid off. I was 16 or 17. I really wanted that part. I look back and I don't know how I, at that point, could have made that decision. I still didn't have a home. But after watching those movies," he's referring to the Scorsese De Niro films, "I just felt, holy shit, I've got one shot to be in this business and I got a movie with Robert De Niro. I won the lottery. So what are you going to do with that, kid? You have this path in front of you. Who knows, maybe that other movie could have been great, but that Gilbert Grape part, I decided to double down and risk not getting any role for a while and hope Gilbert Grape happened." If you haven't seen What's Eating Gilbert Grape, you're truly missing out. The entire cast is phenomenal, and yet Leo is operating on another level. He prepared for the role of Arnie by staying in a center for kids with special needs for a week to be able to give justice to his performance. He didn't want to make Arnie an insulting or cartoonish caricature, but a sincere portrait of a person struggling with an illness. If you watch the film, you will see just how well he pulls it off. His performance was so convincing that onlookers on set were so shocked when he snapped out of character after the director yelled "cut." For his work on the film, Leonardo DiCaprio was nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role in the 1993 Oscars. He was only 19 years old. And although he would lose to Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive, Gilbert Grape gave Leo a lot of goodwill in Tinseltown. After 2 glorious performances in a single year, he was finally hot property.
Do you remember the first time you met?
I do. I was in New York. I believe I was 18 or so. I'd just done Gilbert Grape, and there was an after party down at some bar downtown. You were there. I quickly bumped into you, and I was sort of paralyzed that it was you. And I just sort of stood there, and he said, "Hey, kid, I saw your movie. Yeah, you did a great job in that film. Really, keep it up." And I didn't say anything. Just sort of walked by me.
That's right.
And I was I was shocked that he'd actually seen, I'd done 2 movies at that time, This Boy's Life and Gilbert Grape. I was shocked that he'd actually seen the film and said something to me, and I was just kind of blown away by that.
Marty, do you remember the first time you guys met? I mean, not that first
I don't
time,
remember
but-
that. I remember seeing the film, of course, and Robert De Niro was the one who told me about Leo.
Leo has mentioned this memory in multiple interviews. He never really says what year it was, but I can guess that it was in late 1993 or early 1994 after the release of What's Eating Gilbert Grape. While Scorsese doesn't remember that interaction, he does remember seeing the film for the first time. I hadn't seen Gilbert Grape in theaters, but I happened to catch part of it on television on one of the film channels. Myself and my wife were watching it, and I thought it was a documentary. I didn't recognize Johnny Depp, the mother was great, and I was amazed by Leo. And then I realized that it was actually a staged film. I thought, who's that boy? We saw the name, it was the name that De Niro told me about. In the early 90s, Marty was on a hot streak. He started the decade off with Goodfellas, which many critics considered to be his magnum opus. Roger Ebert even called the film a more masterful gangster picture than The Godfather. Goodfellas was a great critical and financial success, putting Marty on top of the world. He followed it up with a remake of Cape Fear. The film was a massive smash in the box office, earning over $182 million against a $35 million budget. Then there was his sophisticated adaptation of Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence, which was well reviewed and lauded for being something thematically different for the director. The movie was a moderate box office success and was nominated for 5 Oscars. Side note, I personally feel The Age of Innocence is Scorsese's most underrated film. Casino came next, and once again it made some good cash. While the reviews were positive, the film's style was often compared to Goodfellas, and Marty was criticized for treading in very similar territory. With a string of critically acclaimed money-making films in the early 90s, Marty was really in a position to make what he wanted. He chose to work on Kundun, an epic biographical picture about the 14th Dalai Lama. The making and aftermath of Kundun is really complicated and I won't discuss it in length, but I'll try to explain it very briefly because it's significant to this story. If you want to read more about it, there's a lot of material online. All it takes is a Google search. Originally, Universal Pictures was on board to distribute Kundun, but after the studio was sold to the conglomerate Seagram, they dropped the project, fearing that its portrayal of China's occupation of Tibet might affect their business in the alcoholic beverage industry. Disney decided to take on the role of distributor instead, hoping that the prestigious team behind Kundun would help them become a more serious awards player. When Kundun finally hit theaters in 1997, the backlash from China was massive. Along with the release of 2 other Hollywood films, TriStar's 7 Years in Tibet starring Brad Pitt, and MGM's political thriller Red Corner starring Richard Gere, who was a longtime supporter of the Dalai Lama and a very vocal critic on the country's human rights record, China threatened to ban business from all 3 studios if they continued their distribution plans. The Los Angeles Times was reporting on the issue and published an excerpt from the Chinese ministry's warning to Hollywood. It reads, "Taking up Tibet and human rights issues, those films viciously attack China and hurt Chinese people's feelings. Although the matter has been taken up by the Chinese parties concerned and all kinds of efforts have been made, those 3 American companies are still pushing out these films. We must maintain sharp vigilance." The studios ultimately decided to stand by their films, resulting to China canceling any future plans with them. Disney instantly regretted it. Disney boss Michael D. Eisner would meet with the Chinese Prime Minister in October 1998 and apologize for the film, calling it a stupid mistake, writes John Bleasdale in his retrospective essay. He went on to say in the same meeting, "This film was a form of insult to our friends, but other than journalists, very few people in the world ever saw it. The flop and subsequent paucity of home entertainment releases felt strategic as Disney brushed it under the carpet and fixed fences with an eye to reopening China's huge markets to Disney product, as well as the development and building of Disneyland Shanghai." So, why am I mentioning all of this in a video about Leonardo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese's partnership? Well, the Kundun debacle had serious repercussions to Scorsese's career in the late 90s. Because of the scandal, along with the disappointing reception of his other film, Bringing Out the Dead, the director struggled to find financing for his passion project, Gangs of New York, which he had wanted to make since the late 1970s. The ambitious epic about the forgotten gang wars in 19th century New York was considered too risky for a director whose last 2 pictures were certified box office duds. Now, where was Leo during all of this? Well, he was starring in a little production called Titanic. Maybe you've heard of it. While Kundun was struggling to find an audience, everybody's mom, dad, sister, brother, grandparents, basically the whole world, was lining up to see James Cameron's epic new film in movie theaters. Already a teen heartthrob after appearing in Romeo and Juliet the year before, Titanic further cemented DiCaprio as a bona fide movie star. I mean, I don't think I have to tell you how famous Leo became after the release of Titanic. This was the time of Leo mania, and the young star had everybody on his side. Hollywood loved the fact that his movies made money, directors wanted to work with him, critics thought he was a good actor, gossip columnists were intrigued by his personal life, and tabloids and magazines wanted his face on their covers. Leo's popularity was due in thanks to his enormous fan base comprised of teenage girls who had stuck with him since growing pains. The truth is, this demographic had great power in the market. They were the audience who were happy to go to theaters 2, 3, or even 4 times just to see their Hollywood crush on the big screen. He was so famous that he even had best-selling biographies written about him, such as Leonardo DiCaprio, Modern Day Romeo. Guys, he was 23 years old. Anyway, DiCaprio's fame gave him the power to finance projects with his name. He followed up Titanic with some big money-making films such as The Man in the Iron Mask in 1998. There was also The Beach in 2000, which director Danny Boyle originally intended for Ewan McGregor, but the studio refused to greenlight it unless Leo was in the leading role. Despite great work and financial stability, Leo was looking to shed off his teen idol image. He had grown tired of the type of fame that Titanic brought him and tried to look for more grown-up leading man roles. He would achieve this by working with big-name American auteurs. The first he sought out was, of course, his idol, Martin Scorsese. Looking back, Leo said, "As soon as I had the opportunity to finance films with my name, this was the first real attempt I made to proactively go after a filmmaker and say, 'Will you work with me?' I researched Gangs of New York, which he had been writing on and off for 20 years, and I said, 'Let's do this.' Marty, who dreamed of making gangs since 1977, knew that with Leo on board, his passion project would finally be made. At that point, it was a big crossroads in my career," said Scorsese. "I had made Kundun and Bringing Out the Dead, and both films didn't do well at the box office. Things were changing. So producer Michael Ovitz came up to me and said, 'Don't you want to make Gangs of New York? I'm working with these guys, and one of them is Leo DiCaprio, and he happens to like your films.' That's important. It's a great way to have actors who want to work with you. So we started that way. With Leo set to play the lead role of Amsterdam Valen, Miramax agreed to finance the film for $100 million. Cameras began to roll on December 18, 2000. In an archival write-up done by Entertainment Weekly about iconic cinematic partnerships, the magazine wrote, "In a way, they saved each other. DiCaprio invigorated Gangs of New York, The Aviator, and The Departed with a vibrant masculine rage that hasn't been present in Scorsese's work for years. And Scorsese rescued DiCaprio from heartthrob prison and guided him into challenging, dangerous roles." This statement pretty much captures everything I'm going to talk about in part 3 of this visual essay. If you're expecting me to examine the production history and critical response of every one of their on-screen collaborations, then you're in the wrong place. Instead, I'm here to look at the bigger picture. In this section, I'm going to discuss how DiCaprio and Scorsese's careers drastically changed due to their partnership. But first, let's have a refresher of their 5 films together. They started off with Gangs of New York in 2002. DiCaprio plays Amsterdam Valen, an orphan looking to avenge his father by murdering his killer, the gang lord Bill the Butcher. Then came The Aviator, a biopic from 2004, which dissects the life of eccentric Texan millionaire Howard Hughes, who was known for his love of airplanes, women, and making movies. They followed it up with the 2006 Best Picture winning The Departed, where Leo plays an undercover cop infiltrating the Boston mob. The duo then worked on the psychological thriller Shutter Island in 2010 about a police detective investigating the disappearance of a dangerous patient on a secluded hospital facility. And finally, in late 2013, they premiered The Wolf of Wall Street, which chronicles the rise and fall of notorious stockbroker Jordan Belfort, who stole from the poor and gave to himself. Leonardo DiCaprio once spoke of Scorsese to the Hollywood Foreign Press. He said, "For me, I'm selfishly getting to work with someone whom I regard as the greatest living American filmmaker alive, and have these really unique, unbelievably memorable experiences. Every time I'm on set with him, he pushes me and he drives me to be a better actor. He gives you the opportunity to really experiment, try new things, and challenge yourself. And you see that with everyone that shows up for one of his movies. Because of your respect level for his work, everyone brings their A game to the table. They do their research and their homework. There really is that sense, and it's not just the actors, it's everyone involved, where you feel like you're part of a lucky elite group fortunate enough to work with him." This quote just scratches the surface of all the good things DiCaprio has to say about Scorsese. I read and watched so many interviews for this episode, and Leo has nothing but praise for the filmmaking legend. He calls Marty a genius of cinema, a father-like figure, and a great artist. And honestly, I can see why. He owes him quite a lot. Despite one Oscar nomination to his name, the fame he garnered from Titanic and Romeo and Juliet put Leo in a box. While he was attempting to be a serious actor as early as his Gilbert Grape days, people basically saw him as a rowdy, party-going, young Hollywood heartthrob who had more power than he could chew. Behind closed doors, Leo was trying to break free from that image. Like I mentioned in the previous chapter, he sought out Scorsese. He did this not only to lose his teen idol image, but also to fulfill his dream of appearing in one of Marty's films. While the success of Gangs of New York brought new attention to both their names, Marty was having a comeback and Leo had returned after a 2-year break, it wasn't until the making of The Aviator where they truly found their rhythm. Leo was already on board as Howard Hughes after developing the script with director Michael Mann for several years. When Mann opted to go off and do his Muhammad Ali biopic instead, Leo turned to Scorsese once again. DiCaprio recalls, "So I was sitting there with this screenplay, and I remember sending it over to Marty in hopes that he'd be interested in it. The first thing he said was that he didn't know anything about aviation, but that he didn't know anything about boxing either, and he did Raging Bull. So that was encouraging. That, to me, is one of the most nostalgic memories I have of really making a movie. For the first time, I had the responsibility of bringing material like this to a director of Marty's stature. The film was a great critical and financial success, but more importantly, it gave Scorsese great confidence in the young star. Not only did he realize DiCaprio had the ability to lose himself in a challenging role, but also had the great artistic hunch to pick interesting projects. In addition, Marty appreciated Leo's collaborative nature even when they'd often butt heads on set. When they were both sent scripts for The Departed later on, they instantly knew that they had to make it with each other. For his performance as Howard Hughes, the young man earned his second Academy Award nomination, this time for Best Actor in a Leading Role. This period of his career is when I'd argue that Leonardo DiCaprio became Leo. Before The Aviator, he was Jack Dawson, Romeo, the movie star with boyish good looks. Now, he was a legitimate and exciting leading man. From this point onward, every time Leo's name would be attached to a project, it would be considered a prestige picture vying for Oscars. The two would recreate this formula with The Wolf of Wall Street nearly a decade later. Leo would read Jordan Belfort's book and bring it to Scorsese to direct as a film. After the success of The Aviator, DiCaprio began to manage his career differently. In the 90s, he was everywhere. He frequented nightclubs, ran around town with his infamous posse, and did a lot of interviews with MTV and other entertainment channels. However, as he transitioned to more adult roles, he made himself more scarce to the public. He reverted back to the teachings of his first agent, Rick Yorn, who learned from his mentor, Lou Waserman, that movie stars should only be seen in a dark room. Like the stars of old, such as Greta Garbo or Cary Grant, you have to go to the movies to see DiCaprio. As an adult, he does not do commercials inside the USA, has yet to take on any TV projects, and he'll only do talk shows when the promotion of a film requires it. The rule is simple, and DiCaprio follows it to the letter. In addition, DiCaprio avoids posting anything personal on social media, he mostly attends film premieres and award shows with his mother, and he meticulously prepares for interviews by never going off script. He also set a rule for the type of films he would make moving forward. It is very interesting to compare DiCaprio's career with those of his contemporaries, since the comparison highlights all the things that he has refused, such as starring in a movie franchise. Since the end of the 1990s, superheroes or recurrent characters have reigned supreme in Hollywood. Apart from DiCaprio, barely any actors have escaped the clutches of this format. From Clooney and Bale in various Batman interpretations, to Maguire in Spider-Man, Matt Damon as Jason Bourne, or Ben Affleck as Daredevil in Batman, DiCaprio has never considered taking on one of these roles, which guarantees, apart from a mass of merchandise, figurines, video games, and images on cereal packets, what the studio wants to achieve at any cost: popularity with a 12 to 25 age bracket, that wonderful segment of the population who will pay to see the same film time and time again. In short, Leo wanted to be the only main attraction in all his films. He opts for original, compelling material that couldn't hide behind the security of franchise filmmaking. While he was very instrumental for orchestrating this major career shift, he really owes a lot to Scorsese. I mean, think about it. Would Leo be taken as seriously as he is now if Marty didn't choose to work with him so many times during his transition period? Probably not. As Entertainment Weekly said, he helped him break out of heartthrob prison. Scorsese lent his signature touch to the adult dramas that Leo wanted to make. Marty believed in him and allowed himself to be a director for hire. I've read a lot of things online to the effect of the DiCaprio-Scorsese partnership will never live up to the De Niro-Scorsese partnership. While that's true for some people, I do think that the statement is a little bit unfair when looking at the bigger picture. The truth is, their cinematic collaboration has been equally beneficial to Scorsese as it has been for DiCaprio. Firstly, Leo has helped Marty expand his palette beyond the types of movies he normally liked to make. For instance, his filmography between the 70s to the 90s were mostly populated with gangster films, crime dramas, and movies with religious themes. Today, Scorsese has expanded his repertoire with biopics about misunderstood Hollywood figures, psychological thrillers in the vein of Hitchcock, and an opulent comedy about Wall Street's most infamous figure. Jesse Hassinger writes, "These newer Scorsese movies aren't as hard-edged as his De Niro pictures, it's true, but they often allow Scorsese to indulge in a cinematic lushness worthy of the stars so often at the center." And yeah, that I agree with. Scorsese's late career with DiCaprio has also made him one of Hollywood's most bankable directors. He ended the 90s with Bringing Out the Dead, which lost more than half its budget at the box office. When he got involved with Leo, things drastically changed. With every new collaboration, the box office receipts only got bigger and bigger. Gangs of New York made $193 million worldwide, while The Wolf of Wall Street made an astonishing $400 million. I remember seeing the news in 2010, and headlines said something like, "Shutter Island is Scorsese's most financially successful film yet," only for it to be dethroned years later by The Wolf of Wall Street. This financial success has afforded Marty more power to work on his passion projects such as Silence in 2015 and The Irishman in 2019, which would make pennies at the box office. Yet, major studios remain confident enough to greenlight excessively expensive future Leo Marty endeavors. For instance, Apple TV Plus is spending a reported $200 million on their upcoming movie Killers of the Flower Moon. On a side note, if you haven't seen Silence, you absolutely must. It's beautiful and truly showcases a different side of Marty's artistry. But while watching it, remember that he never would have made it without his strong partnership with Leonardo DiCaprio. In 2006, Martin Scorsese was already considered a living legend of the industry. Everybody was rooting for him to win the Best Director Oscar for his work in The Departed, and it was no surprise to anyone when he finally took the statue home. On the other hand, Leo would continue to make films with or without Scorsese to great commercial and critical success. Every time he'd make something, there would be instant Oscar buzz. There would also be a flurry of hilarious memes on why he didn't have an Academy Award yet. Many people truly thought he would finally win for his role as Jordan Belfort in The Wolf of Wall Street, but alas, he lost to Matthew McConaughey for his comeback role in Dallas Buyers Club. This made the passion to get him an Oscar even stronger. When he returned to the screen in 2015 with Alejandro González Iñárritu's The Revenant, that little blonde boy finally won Oscar Gold. He thanked Martin Scorsese in his speech for teaching him so much about the cinematic art form. The names Leonardo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese will forever be linked. They have made 5 great films together and will probably continue doing so until the end of their careers, because every time they do a film together, it becomes a cinematic event. This year, we're finally getting another one of their collaborations, and I'm sure I'm not alone when I say that I'm very excited for it. Till the release of Killers of the Flower Moon, I have their other movies to get me by. Luckily for us, we live in a world where we can experience their work together anytime we want. So turn on your television, put in a Blu-ray, or sign in to one of the many different streaming platforms and have yourself an eventful movie day by watching Leo and Marty create cinematic magic.